welcome to the deep dive. We're going to be diving into something that I think you've all been curious about, which is what happened to the church during the pandemic.
Okay.
We've got all this great research you sent over, notes, articles, data.
Right.
And it points to some pretty surprising conclusions.
Yeah, it really does.
So one of the things that really jumped out at me was that 87% of churches had to close their doors back in 2020.
Right.
I mean, you would think that that would have been a big blow.
You would think that, yeah.
But when you look at the data, it doesn't really show that.
No, it really doesn't.
It's almost like the opposite happened.
Yeah, you see growth resilience.
How do we explain that?
Well, I think one thing to remember is what was happening in society at large.
Right.
There was so much isolation, lockdowns, social distancing, all of that really took a toll.
Yeah.
And one study even found 68% of people felt lonelier than ever during that time.
And that's with all the digital connection that we have?
That's right.
You're saying that even though we have all that, we're still missing those deep connections.
Absolutely.
So how does the story of the church fit into all this?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. Because the data shows a clear difference between churches that struggled and churches that adapted.
So the churches that figured out how to still connect.
Yeah.
Even though they couldn't meet in person.
Yes. And those churches seem to understand the church as more of a living organism than an institution.
Interesting.
And they saw increases in engagement.
Like how much?
Well, one study found a 45% increase.
Wow.
For churches that adapted.
Right.
Meanwhile, traditional churches saw engagement drop 30%.
That is a huge difference.
It is a stark contrast.
So what were those adaptable churches doing?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was the secret sauce? And I think one of the recurring themes in the research you sent over is this idea of abiding. Which comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 15. And it's this image of the church as a vine. And its members as branches. I see.
All interconnected.
Right. So it's not just about showing up once a week.
No, it's not.
For a service.
It's about something much deeper than that.
So you're saying those churches that thrived during the pandemic were really getting at this idea of abiding.
I think that's a strong possibility.
Figuring out how to still be that source of connection even when they couldn't meet in person.
Yeah, because when you think about it, we're social creatures.
Right.
We crave connection. And when those needs are met, when we feel a sense of belonging and purpose, it affects our well-being. So
this isn't just some feel-good thing.
No.
You're saying there's actual data that backs this up.
There is.
What kind of data are we talking about here?
Well, one study found that 82% of people who are part of a strong faith community report higher levels of well-being. So maybe that's really what helped those churches not just survive, but thrive during a really hard time.
They were focused on people, on nurturing those relationships, on being that source of support and belonging.
So if this idea of abiding is so key to the church's resilience, what does that actually look like?
Right. What does it look like in practice?
What makes a church community truly abiding?
Well, there's a passage in Ephesians 2.19 that describes believers as members of the family of God. Powerful imagery, right? It gets at the heart of what makes those abiding communities so strong.
So it's not just about going to church together.
No.
It's more about feeling like you're part of a family.
It is.
Okay, so is there any research to back that up?
There is. There's actually been studies on community development, and they found that communities built on those strong family ties are much more resilient than those that are based just on like shared interests or activities. In fact, family-based communities are 3 times more likely to weather a crisis successfully.
It's like blood is thicker than water.
That's right.
When you have those bonds, you're going to support each other no matter what.
Exactly. And that's what we see in these abiding churches.
They're there for each other.
They are. They're providing that emotional support, the practical help, that sense of belonging.
Okay, so how do they actually live that out?
That's a good question. I mean, if we go back to that image of the vine and the branches from John 15, it's really a picture of interdependence. The branches need that vine to survive. But the vine needs the branches to bear fruit.
So it goes both ways.
It does. It's mutual.
That's interesting.
It is.
Okay, so it's about having roots and reach.
Yeah, you're grounded, but you're also reaching out.
And is that reflected in the data?
It is.
Yep.
One study found that churches focused on abiding during the pandemic had a 60% greater positive impact on their communities.
Okay, so it's not just surviving, it's thriving.
And it's making a difference.
Yeah.
And then, here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
This outward focus actually fuels the growth of these churches.
Oh, wow.
They're not just surviving, they're thriving.
It's so cool how these deep dives,
I know.
we start with a simple question.
Yeah.
And then we end up going
Down these rabbit holes.
Yeah.
That's right.
and finding all this cool stuff.
And this one's painting a pretty hopeful picture
It is.
of the future of the church.
I can't wait to dive deeper into this in our next segment.
Me too.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, don't go anywhere.
It's funny, as we're talking about this outward focus,
Yeah.
it made me think about the Great Commission
Oh, yeah.
and how all that fits into this.
Yeah, that's an interesting connection.
For our listeners who may not be familiar,
Right.
what is the Great Commission?
Well, you can find it in Matthew 28.
Okay.
And it's essentially Jesus instructing his followers to go and make disciples of all nations.
So basically share the Christian message
Yeah, spread the word.
with the whole world.
Exactly.
And you're saying there's a link
Mm-hmm.
between that and the churches that are thriving.
Yeah, it seems like those churches that are really living that out by serving their communities
Yeah.
and sharing their faith are the ones that are experiencing the most significant growth.
So it's not just about maintaining the institution
No, it's not.
of the church.
Right.
It's more about being a force for good
That's right.
in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there any data
Oh, there is.
to back that up?
Always data.
Okay.
One study found that churches with an emphasis on community engagement and outreach experience an average annual growth of 25%.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, in their overall community impact.
So it's like the more they focus outward,
Yeah.
the more they grow and thrive.
Yeah. Exact. It's like a virtuous cycle.
But they're tapping into that
Yeah.
need for connection and purpose.
That's it.
We were just talking about.
Exactly.
So it really is challenging that narrative of the church being outdated,
Yeah.
irrelevant,
Dying.
all of that.
Right.
It's exciting to see this shift
It is.
happening.
Yeah, and it's not just about, doing good deeds
Right.
for the sake of doing good deeds.
It's about genuinely living it.
It's about really living out those values
Yes.
of love and compassion and service.
That's right.
And I feel like that ties back into that idea of abiding. It's not just about being rooted,
Yeah.
but also reaching out.
It is like that image of the tree,
Yeah.
right? With the roots and the branches,
Mm-hmm.
deeply rooted, but also bearing fruit.
So we've looked at all this data.
We have.
We've looked at all this research. What does it all mean for our listener?
Right. How do we apply this?
Yeah, what are the takeaways here? I think the first takeaway is that belonging matters.
Well.
I mean, we all crave that connection. And whether it's through a church, a synagogue, a mosque, some other kind of community group,
Yeah.
find your people.
Find those places where you feel
Yeah.
seen and heard
Absolutely.
and valued.
It's not just about receiving support, though.
Right.
It's about giving it,
That's a good point.
finding ways to contribute to something larger than yourself. I mean, it could be as simple as volunteering at a soup kitchen or something like that.
Right. Or helping out a neighbor.
Exactly. Those small acts can make a big difference.
And it can also benefit you
It does.
as what
Right.
that virtuous cycle.
So if you're listening to this and you're part of a church community,
Yeah.
think about how you can live out this idea of abiding.
Right. Are you a source of support and belonging for your members?
And are you actively serving your community
Yeah. And sharing your faith.
in a way that's making a real difference?
Yeah. That's a good question to ask.
It is.
So it's not just about going through the motions,
No.
but it's about really living it.
Embodying those values in a way that impacts the world around you.
It's amazing how these deep dives,
I know.
we start out
Yeah.
with a simple question,
Right.
but it leads us to all these really interesting places.
It does. It's fascinating.
So we've talked about the resilience of the church.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about abiding.
Yeah.
We've talked about the Great Commission.
You have.
But there's one more piece of this puzzle that I think is worth exploring. That statistic we keep coming back to.
Yeah.
About 73% of people searching for belonging.
It really makes you think
Yeah.
about the role the church could play.
You're saying they could do even more
I think so.
to be that source of belonging?
Imagine if churches were known as places where people could find solace purpose,
Okay.
real, authentic community.
That's a beautiful idea.
Yeah. But it would require a shift.
In what way?
Not just opening the doors,
Yeah.
but creating spaces where people feel seen, heard, valued.
For who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Not for what they believe.
Or how they perform.
So radical acceptance.
That's a good way to put it.
But is that really possible?
It's a high bar.
Yeah. I mean, churches are made up of people.
They are.
And people aren't perfect.
You're right. No community is perfect.
But we could still strive for it.
We can, and I think when we do, even imperfectly, it can make a world of difference.
Those churches we were talking about before.
Yeah.
The ones that thrived during the pandemic.
Right. They adapted. They met people where they were at.
They offered support.
Yeah, genuine connection.
So maybe it's not about being perfect.
No.
But it's about being real.
Authenticity goes a long way.
Showing up with an open heart.
And a willingness to connect.
Yeah. And maybe that's where it starts.
What starts?
True belonging.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
It's not about ignoring our imperfections.
Right.
It's about embracing
our shared humanity.
Yes, exactly.
Right. That's good.
What if, instead of trying to fit people into a mold,
yeah,
we celebrate their uniqueness?
Recognize that they each bring something to the table.
Like that image of the vine and branches.
Yeah, I love that image.
All these different branches.
Yeah.
But they're all connected.
They all draw life from the same source.
So in our differences,
yeah,
we find richness.
And the fullness of community.
And that's a powerful message.
It is.
Especially right now.
When everything feels so divided.
Yeah, like a reminder that connection is still possible.
Across those differences.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
yeah,
any final thoughts?
I do.
Okay, I'm listening.
What if the future of the church wasn't about buildings or programs?
Okay.
What if it was about people?
I like that.
Creating those spaces of radical acceptance, of genuine connection.
Where everyone feels like they belong.
That's the dream.
It's a beautiful one.
It is.
That's all the time we have for this episode of The Deep Dive.
Okay.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
Keep diving deep.
And we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.